is the Parliament of Western Australia. It is here that the laws of Western Australia are made. A parliament is thought to be the voice of the people, and it is through the ballot box where the people choose who is to govern them that their voice is most obviously heard. But voting at an election is not the only way that people can have their say. Petitions, submissions to committees, questions in Parliament, lobbying local members, and of course, demonstrations and rallies are all ways that the voice of the people can be heard. The Parliament of Western Australia was not originally on this site. From 1890 to 1904, it was on two sites in St George's Terrace and Hay Street. Having the two houses on different sites had its problems, especially during the ceremonial opening of the Parliament after an election. Sir John Forrest, Premier at the time, called it inconvenient. One of the earliest examples of people voicing their opinion about the Parliament and its members was during the ceremonial procession between the two houses in the 1890s. Young children, or ill-mannered street urchins as they were referred to by the press, and various members of the public, would throw stones and hurl insults at the members and the officials as they ran the gauntlet from the Legislative Assembly Chamber to the Legislative Council Chamber for the opening of the Parliament by the Governor, the representative of Queen Victoria. It is thought that the indignity of this procession was one of the things that led to the move to have the houses brought to the one site. And that site is right up the top of St George's Terrace, where Parliament House now stands. For some members of the public, voting for a candidate at election is not enough. They want to have their say about a particular issue in a more forceful way, and that has been the case for many years. A referendum is one way of doing that. Did you know that Western Australians actually voted to break away from the rest of the Australian states and go back to being a separate colony again? It was 1933, in the depth of the Depression that had gripped the economies of the world, and Western Australians had voted at a referendum in favour of seceding from the Australian Commonwealth because many believed that the Federation favoured New South Wales and Victoria, whilst penalising WA. A record 91% of eligible voters turned up to cast their vote in the referendum, and it was a 68% vote in favour of secession. It was a very emphatic result, and so the government acted on the will of the people. But it was not to be. The Commonwealth Parliament put forward a very forceful argument for the Federation to remain united, and the British Parliament had the last word and refused to allow Western Australia to secede. The people do not always get what they want, so does people power ever work? One example of a government having to withdraw a planned policy after protest from the public was the solar panel rebate backdown by the Western Australian Government in 2013. Many people had signed contracts to get a rebate from the government for selling excess electricity produced by their solar panels and selling it to the government-owned electricity provider. In the budget, the government planned to lower the rebate, and people who had signed 10-year contracts were not happy. The government did not expect to be met with such strong opposition, and eventually the government withdrew the plan and the people won. The rebate stayed. Protests are one way of getting your voice heard, but there are other ways of making sure your point of view is presented to the Parliament. Petitions, submissions to committees, questions in Parliament, and lobbying your local Member of Parliament are all ways of getting your voice heard.
The first constituent I got, he had to pay 28 cents more on his electricity bill, and he wanted to know why, so he was my first constituent. My second one was who I found out a bit later was a bit of a con man, wanted $750,000 to get a boutique railway from Perth to Albany. So there's no set thing. I go to work each day and I don't know what's going to happen. Don't know, small issues. As I say to people when they come in, they say, oh, it's only a small issue, but I say, when you sit in that chair, you're the most important person in the world to me at this time. When I speak to young people or people and new electors, I say, you might have an opinion when someone comes in. They don't want to hear your opinion. They just want you to listen. And a lot of people will come to you and say, look, I know you can't do anything, but I'm glad I've offloaded it to someone. And sometimes you can help. Sometimes the ones who you think, well, that's really easy, you can help, but it's the ones that you can't help, that they're going home to an environment that isn't friendly, or they're the ones that keep you awake at night. thinking, well, I just wish I could do more. So you can't always help them, but you do as much as you can.
Grievances are a great opportunity for government and opposition members to raise matters particular to their electorates or an issue that's affecting their constituency. So it's simply a term of grievance where they get an opportunity to grieve, to raise an issue with a minister, and the minister responds. Now that takes place over a 7-minute period for both, so the Member of Parliament has 7 minutes to raise the grievance in Parliament to the minister, and the minister has 7 minutes to respond. And a lot of members use that as an opportunity to raise an issue that's of particular concern for them in their constituencies. The ministers have an opportunity through a brief ministerial statement, it's a 3-minute period, to raise a matter related to their portfolio. So if the Education Minister has a particular issue or a policy or a decision that's been made, they may use a brief ministerial statement to alert the House that, of that particular issue from their portfolio.
The Row 8 protest was an obvious example of the people demanding that their voice be heard. Former member Lynn McLaren was involved.
Well, the actions to stop Row 8 started years ago with a petition, really, that was tabled in the upper house calling for an inquiry into whether it was necessary. And all through that time, we asked questions in Parliament, and the community protested. They had rallies, they had community picnics, they built significant community support for the wetlands and opposition for the road. They held lots of public meetings. In addition to that, once the government started clearing the bushland, the community was already prepared to defend the area. And the protests that ensued over those weeks during the election served to put this issue on the news every single night. It demonstrated to the government that there was a community prepared to defend their bushland. And I think it revealed quite a lot about the seriousness of the issue and the degree to which the government would go to try to force through that road.
The committees, they're very important. I think they, in many ways, represent the Parliament more than the government does. True parliamentary democracy, you see it more in the committees than you do in the government, because it's about going out there and discovering things, and then, everyday backbenchers discovering stuff and presenting a report to the government to say, this is what you should do. And I remember getting particularly annoyed with some person that appeared before us, and it turns out this person was a resident of Hong Kong, and she wasn't from a Commonwealth country, so she didn't really understand how our committees worked. And she was rude about our committee and the whole system, obviously didn't understand how any of it worked. And I can remember just basically telling her to be quiet because she didn't know what she was talking about. And the committee, there is a big level of ignorance about committees and their roles and their powers. And a lot of people, I think, are influenced by what they see from the United States in their parliament, where they seem to have more powers. And of course, they go into all kinds of sort of Hollywood acts when they've got people before them and things like that. Whereas our committees aren't like that as a rule. They do have specific powers. A few times we had to summons people to get them to come and talk to us, or summons documents. And so they're very important. And as I said, I think in many ways they are more representative of the way Parliament was when it first started than it is now.
Daylight saving was an issue that the public had very definite and differing views on. In rural areas, it was not popular, but in urban areas, there was high support for it. However, 4 referenda later, there is still no daylight saving in Western Australia. So it seems the people have spoken on the issue. One issue that caused a lot of division within the community was the shark cull debate. Over 300 people joined a rally at Parliament House in protest of the government policy, and 8,000 people signed a petition. The policy was a response to the tragic deaths of 6 surfers and swimmers at various beaches in Perth and southern Western Australia. the government called for the killing of sharks that posed an imminent risk, and baited drumlines were to be set to catch and kill sharks. The policy sparked public protests and drew national and international attention to Western Australia. A total of 72 drumlines were deployed off popular Perth and southwest Western Australian beaches from November 2013 to April 2014. A rally in the heart of the then Premier Colin Barnett's seat of Cottesloe drew thousands of protesters, which was soon backed up by poll results that showed the plan was opposed by large sections of the public. Public protests seemed to be having an effect and a possible influence on government policy, until 2 more shark attacks in 2016 at beaches to the north and south of Perth, and the tragic deaths of 2 people revived the government's policy stance. Many people do not want to protest, but simply want to speak to their local Member of Parliament about a particular issue or problem they may have. The Member for Armidale, Dr Tony Butty, talks about the sorts of concerns constituents have when they come to see their local member.
We have some really strange people and strange requests that come into our office. There was a lady that came and saw me. She was an Australian who lived in America for a number of years, said that she had good friends in Hollywood, and she lived in a housing complex within a stone throw of my office actually. And she said there was little men running in the ceiling every night, and they were coming and taking her underwear off the clothesline and her bras and so forth. And she wanted me to make sure those little men were taken away from the ceiling. I said I'll do my best. I did actually write a letter to the local police, who were very good about it, to tell you the truth, and they did go and visit her, but did have to tell her there was no little men running up in the ceiling. But there are also many very sad stories. And living in Armidale, we have one of the highest domestic violence rates in Australia. So some of the cases and demands I have to deal with are, pretty sad and pretty urgent.
Some people have very serious concerns that they want their local member to know about. A group of people from the Kimberley in the far north of Western Australia brought a message stick to the member for Kimberley to draw attention to youth suicide in that region.
This message stick that I brought from the people in the Kimberley, this was carved by an old Aboriginal man who came from the desert. And this story tells you, it has a message in it, because of the way that families had been treated, and then the end result is we see in a lot of suicide that has happened over that time. Lots of our young people in the Kimberley have been affected mentally through all this sort of trauma. And I guess in one sense, I was able to think some of the younger ones have found it extra hard. There's 7 lines over this side and there's 7 lines on this side. And that tells the story as to how many families were affected in that one small community through the loss of their family and young members through suicide.
Sometimes people cannot get to the Parliament, so the Parliament comes to them. In the past, the WA Parliament has held sittings in Geraldton, Kalgoorlie, Albany and Bunbury. The Parliamentary Education Office also tours to regional areas with an outreach program to schools to help regional students gain an understanding of the workings of the Parliament. One of the best ways to understand your Parliament is to visit it. About 40,000 people visit the West Australian Parliament each year. Some are coming to work with members and staff, while others are students, teachers and tourists wanting to learn about the Western Australian Parliament and take a tour around the beautiful building. When the Parliament isn't sitting, the members, whether they are in government or opposition or whether they are a minister or not, will be working in their offices or travelling around their electorates, meeting their constituents. Most members are also on committees which look at various issues throughout the year. If they are a minister, then they will be in their office with their staff, drawing up new legislation or propose new laws. Then, all the work the ministers and members do in their office must be brought to the Parliament to be publicly explained to the elected representatives of the people. The Parliament belongs to the people. It belongs to you.